Tornado hits Canada. Diplomacy invades Spain. And February fever flares up. I'm David Hood of the Diplomacy Broadcast Network, and this is Deadline, DBN's monthly news program. Dateline, February 2022. For our feature story, it is often said that diplomacy is a game about people, not just pieces. Psychology and interpersonal dynamics are as important to the successful player as our tactical ability or strategic sense. Solo victories are hard to come by as well, with positionally forced solos being particularly difficult to achieve. So many solos we see on DBN's Game Day Live broadcasts are instead thrown to the soloist by another player on the board. Does this affect the legitimacy of that solo win in any way? Is throwing a solo defensible? And if so, in what situations? Opinions vary widely in our hobby on this subject. So let's hear what a panel of three experienced diplomacy players say on this subject later in the broadcast. But first, a look at headlines from around the world of diplomacy. February fever is here. The second annual Diplomacy Broadcast Network Invitational virtual face-to-face tournament is all set to begin, with round one on Friday, February 18th at 6 p.m., and then two more preliminary rounds on Saturday and one on that Sunday. Each of the 28 participants, from top seed Sering Kwok on down, will compete in two of those rounds for the chance to make the Super 7. Those are the 7 who will advance to the finals on Saturday, February 26th. All of this action will be covered live right here on this channel. Will the high seeds dominate play, or will Cinderellas scamper their way to the top board? For a preview of the action, let's talk to DBNI GM Zachary Moore.
David, hey, hello.
Zachary, welcome to Deadline, and give us a brief rundown of the tournament rules and format.
Absolutely, David. This is the top 28 players from the diplomacy circuit this season. They qualified through tournaments that were played all year, starting last March. And now they're meeting on the biggest stage over 4 rounds of diplomacy, of which the top 7 will compete in a top board for the win. And we have a little added wrinkle just for DBNI that instead of randomly assigning powers, they're going to bid through some newfangled system designed by Brandon Fogel of DBN. They will bid for their powers to take control of their destiny.
So do you expect the play in those preliminary rounds to be play it safe or risk-taking? Zach, what do you think?
I think you're gonna cut it right in half by the years, David Hood. I think there's going to be play it safe until about 1904, and then I think you're going to see a lot of risk-taking in the late game because each player only has 2 rounds, so they have to make a move at some point.
It's really true. Well, I know that you're going to be completely impartial because you're the GM for this thing. But still, do you have your eye on any particular player that you think has, late season momentum coming into the tournament?
Yeah, I think a player who we've talked a lot about in the last month or two on this network is Nicolas Tallet. He just won the Virtual Diplomacy League. He's the DBN Rookie of the Year, very new to the hobby, and won on one of the biggest stages. And so now it's another step up, and I think he's got what it takes. So I'm really intrigued to see how he performs at this level.
Well, I know I'll be looking to see how he does and how the other 27 contestants do this weekend in the preliminary rounds. Zach, thanks for being on the show and thanks for GMing the event.
Thank you, David.
So speaking of that last weekend in February, if you'd rather watch that big game on tape delay and instead just play some diplomacy yourself, guess what? You have that option. The TotalCon Games event in Marlborough, Massachusetts will include a face-to-face diplomacy tournament run by veteran GM Alex Maslow. Round 1 begins that Friday at 7 p.m., with additional rounds to begin Saturday at 1 and then Sunday at 9 a.m. For more information, you can visit www.totalcon.com, and there's also a link below to the Discord server for the diplomacy event itself. The last tournament of the 2021 DBNI season was actually in late January of 2022, the Cascadia event, which is normally held face to face in Vancouver, but which was played virtually for the second year in a row due to COVID. Tommy Anderson of Massachusetts took the title on the strength of a round two solo as Italy, adding this Cascadia win to his tournament victory at the Liberty Cup from the 2020 season. TD Chris Brand hosted 32 different participants at Cascadia, with every game covered in detail right here on the Diplomacy Broadcast Network. A link to that coverage can be found below. So here's a video reaction of one old school diplomacy hobbyist to Tombstone's achievement of the Throne solo. In honor of Tommy Tornado Anderson and all you other soloists out there, here we go. All the beautiful sounds in a dip round in a single word. A solo, a solo, a solo, a solo. The most beautiful sound I've ever heard. A solo, a solo, a solo, a solo, solo. I've soloed, I've just got 18 for a solo. And suddenly that phrase will never be the same to me. A solo, I've just won the round with a solo. And suddenly I found how wonderful a round can be. I've soloed, say it loud and there's music playing. Say it soft and it's almost like praying. I've soloed. DBN should keep saying, I've soloed. 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 I've soloed, I've soloed, I've soloed. Say it loud when you're proudly crowing. Say it soft if you've got someone throwing. I've soloed, not just some freaking board top. I've soloed. The most beautiful sound I've ever heard. A solo. On Deadline, we have reported on past shows about how diplomacy is used to teach history, international relations, and other subjects in both schools and universities. Recently, the oldest business school in Spain, ESIC, used our game of diplomacy in a course on commercial negotiation skills at its campus in Valencia. The students played 2 games total over 2 weeks using play diplomacy, but they did it in teams of 3, with each team playing 1 power on the board. So there was negotiation not only among the 7 great powers, but also within the 3-person teams playing those powers. While the results of this experiential learning project were mixed, we hope that other business schools will build on this to determine the best way to incorporate the game of diplomacy into their curricula. A link to the report from ESIC can be found below in the show notes. Now let's take a trip around the various websites and YouTube channels for the content providers we call DBN Media Partners. The Diplomacy Briefing newsletter continues its weekly job of keeping us all up to date on hobby news, while also providing enjoyable feature content. The January 28th edition includes a fun video showing the receipt and then unwrapping of one of the spectacular wooden diplomacy sets crafted by Matthew Krill of the state of Washington. Florida Man has released several episodes recently on his YouTube channel, including one with tips about dodging bullets as Austria, another fully explaining the Lepanto opening, and finally one about hosting house games of diplomacy, even though Florida Man has never bloody well hosted one himself. You can find these links to these content providers, as well as our other media partners, at the North American Diplomacy Federation website, thenadf.org. In club news, the Windy City Weasels in Chicago held a face-to-face house game on February 5th. In addition to the usual rogues gallery of Chicagoland rogues, they were joined by Katie Gray, who's in town from her usual perch at Purdue, and Zachary Moore from his usual perch in a big mall surrounded by 10,000 lakes, i.e. Minnesota. Moore's France ended on top, but all 7 players basically won because they were able to get together once again for a face-to-face game of diplomacy. You can find more information about our hobby's best organized local club at windycityweasels.org. Another club, the DC Area Potomac Tea and Knife Society, is restarting its virtual diplomacy games with one coming up on February 26th. The registration link for that match is listed below in the description field. The fine folks at the Diplostrats YouTube channel, Captain Meme and Ezio, have released the first 2 of a series of videos called The Battle for Humanity. It's focused on the speedboat tournament sponsored by Meta, currently being run on Web Diplomacy. The game analyzed in the first episode is one where the captain played turkey against 5 other humans and a robot developed by Facebook's artificial intelligence team. In the second episode, we see Captain Meme playing Germany in the same tournament. See if you can figure out which player is being played by the bot in each of these 2 games, and you can also evaluate Captain Meme's own play to see if he measures up to his billing as one of last year's DBNI finalists, the Super 7. Below is a link to the Diplostrats YouTube channel. DipCon, the North American Diplomacy Championships for face-to-face play, is literally right around the corner. The 2022 event will be held in conjunction with the Whipping Tournament in San Jose, California, over the weekend of April 29th through May the 1st. Current NADF President Siobhan Nolan and latest DipCon champion Adam Silverman will run this event. It features 4 rounds of diplomacy using the MannerCon scoring system. Yours truly will be there covering this event live from the tournament floor, with commentators joining us from the DBN studios. Sign up now for your chance to claim the DipCon title using the registration form in the description field below. If you can't make it, look for the DBN Game Day live broadcast that Sunday right here on this same YouTube or Twitch channel. Just when you thought there were fewer opportunities for face-to-face play virtually, I'm here to tell you that the 2 leagues we have resume play in March, at least the English language leagues. Gary Sturley's Tour of Britain will have its first game day on Sunday, March 27th, to be followed by the next 2 one-day matches on May 14th and June the 12th. Gary has switched to a one-day format instead of last year's 2-day in order to make it easier for hobbyists to participate through the season. Stay tuned for more details about this on the VWDC Discord server, which is also where you will see news about the premiere of the 2022 season of Zachary Moore's Virtual Diplomacy League, also set to shove off in March, in this case on March the 12th. And now it's time for a segment we call My Favorite Things. We'll interview a diplomacy player about that person's diplomacy journey, and then we'll talk about something of particular interest to that hobbyist, whether or not related to diplomacy. This month, we talked to a British hobbyist, Christopher Ward, about his journeys into both the world of diplomacy and the world of acting. Wardie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, David.
Before we start talking about acting in England and or singing in Switzerland, let's start with where you are located exactly in the UK, and then tell us just how did you get into diplomacy?
Well, as for where I am, I'm in a very small city called Chester in the northwest of England. The little village where I live, I'm about 18 miles south of Liverpool and about 1 mile from the border with Wales. So, to put it in, diplomacy player context, in a diplomacy board, depending on, what board you're playing on, I'm either in Wales or Liverpool province.
So are you on the marches? What do they used to call that? The place between England and Wales was called the Marches or something like that?
Absolutely. There was a book that came out 25 years ago, written by a local historian, about the history of Dodleston, my village, and it's called "The History of a Marcher Parish." So we have a history of war here. We've got the church tower has musket shot holes from the Civil War, and right next to the church, from before that, way back when, we've got the remains of what was a Motte and Bailey castle when the English and Welsh were warring, and Dodleston's flipped either side the boundary several times over the centuries.
Well, as an American, we essentially have no history. So I really do appreciate talking to someone who does have a sense, whose location is actually historical.
Well, we like to do our bit. Sure. As for how I got into diplomacy, I suppose that's a bit historical as well. I was introduced to the game, when I was about 18, it must have been, so 2003, 2004, by a family friend who was playing play by email out of Manus Hand's diplomatic pouch. So that's how I got started. But then the games took a long time. I was playing with other beginners or the novices. We would have I think default was 3-day deadlines. So that isn't particularly quick. We had people dropping out, people missing orders. We would wait for substitutes to come in, and so a game of diplomacy seemed like quite a long commitment, because it would take 4, 5, 6 months to play a game that went to any length of time. And I actually jumped in a sub into a few games, and so I would sort of go in and out and have periods away. So I only played half a dozen or so games over a period of about 10 years. So the last game I played before sort of the pandemic era was back in 2015, and it was only sort of September 2020. It was my brother, who had been introduced at the same time as I was, who suggested we grab 5 friends and remind ourselves how to play the game and have a fun, casual game, which we've sort of been doing via WhatsApp. But then, as you do, I tried to remind myself of the rules and tips and hints how to play. And so, because it'd been such a long time, we both independently thought, for example, that offering support to a unit would restore a cut support. So that's how sort of fuzzy my mind had been. And so I know it's been discussed often on your show and on Game Day Live, the power of YouTube. I was searching on there and found a number of DBN's broadcast partners that have been featured on this show before. But crucial for me was a person you know well, Chris Martin.
Oh my.
Yeah, who for anyone who doesn't know, it was a 1998 World DipCon champion.
Correct.
And he is dance scholar on YouTube. And he has a series of videos called Diplomacy Academy, which I can highly recommend, and also recommend the piece he did on the 2016 World DipCon top board, by the way. Well worth watching. But included in these Diplomacy Academy videos was coverage of, and I went back and checked this earlier, which virtual tournament it was. It was your own virtual DixieCon from 2020.
Yeah.
And that led me down the DBN rabbit hole. And I started watching coverage of the Virtual Diplomacy League just from a distance. I kept missing sort of game days for that. And then I thought, right, okay, January, I'm going to play. And there is no VDL in January because it's top board time. So I made my debut at Virtual Cascadia in January last year, so just over a year ago, and I haven't looked back.
Well, how would you compare the experience of virtual face-to-face, which is what you're talking about, with the extended deadline games you were talking about earlier, the ones that have the longer deadlines?
Yeah, it's quite different. I love the virtual game. It was completely thrilling. The time pressure I found myself under, going from these casual games. I was having week, not long deadlines, and went from a week to 15 minutes. So, that was exhilarating. And you get that instant gratification or instant despair, depending on how your negotiations and orders went, which is completely different, I find, to press. But I have recently returned to press in the both the Nexus Press League and I'm playing in the Nexus Season 7 Press Tournament. And they can have really fun and interesting games as well. But I think there are pros and cons, right? So what I'm finding is that in press, the alliances can be a little more creative, perhaps, because you can have this simultaneous negotiation going on. You're not seen to be leaving a voice channel as you are in virtual face-to-face and going and speak to like your allied enemy or something. I imagine that might be different again still in-person face-to-face because of the the nature of it. But I think I enjoy them both. I think they're both really interesting, but I played so much more virtual now, just because I enjoy it so much. I've been almost an ever present in the
yes you have.
Without success, it's got to be said.
No, that's not true. Well,
I just want to give a quick history lesson, though. Excuse me, David. For those those watching who might think, oh well, in this pandemic era, the virtual face-to-face mode, if you like, genre of the game is the first voice chat only diplomacy we've had, and I have it on good authority that this is not the case, because Granville Williamson, for it was he who introduced me to the game for a time. I guess this must be in the 80s, 90s, played in a diplomacy telephone league based out of Liverpool. So perhaps history has a way of repeating itself.
I definitely need some details on that. As the historian that I am, I would love to hear some details on the telephone.
Apparently that was the thing. I mean, not. I don't think it was live play. I mean, video call phone calls weren't as cheap back then, I guess. But yeah, negotiation instead of by mail, I guess it would have been at the time, was done by telephone instead. Very interesting.
Well, there's a famous couple of stories where Eddie Berson would call people on the phone, long distance because he could afford it. They're like, Eddie, what are you doing calling me on the phone in a diplomacy game? This was back during the postal days. So there has been some telephone negotiation, but I would love to hear about the telephone league. Well, let me segue for just a minute, because this is the segment where we talk about people sort of off the diplomacy board. You're an actor. How in Hades did you get involved in that?
Because I can't possibly stand to get a real job. No, I came kind of in the back door in a way. I didn't sort of do the traditional training, but it's something I've always been interested in. I ran my drama society at university for 2-3 years, but afterwards I set up a theatre company, Thunder Road, with a friend of mine who is a trained actor. And we had some, good success with that. Did some we started with retellings of classic novels. So we did an adaptation of Jekyll and Hyde. We've done The Invisible Man, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. We had an association with Harrogate Theatre in North Yorkshire for a time. But during this, I took a bit of sort of time away from it because I did have a proper job, quote unquote. But when I know
overrated
well,
that it is.
Absolutely. I ended up, jacking that in and thought, well, there's nothing stopping me now from, doing what it is I'm meant to be doing or want to be doing, or think I'm good at. So that's really what happened. And then, the very first. It was only a small production, really, but the very first professional audition I got a call back, and then at the callback I got the part. So I've never looked back, really. I don't have that 100% record. It didn't last very long, but
it's a great start, though. Your first gig.
Well, absolutely, and I've done mainly theatre, but a bit of film, bit of corporate work. Commercial, which you alluded to.
Yeah, there is no way not to talk about your Swiss commercial. So let's just go ahead and do that. How in the heck did that bloody thing happen? And exactly what were you singing towards the end of that commercial?
Well, out of tune probably is the correct answer. I am not a triple threat at all. I'm an actor, and that's about it. But for this commercial, they wanted sort of burly blokes looking emotional, getting all upset about their friend who'd had an accident in the workplace. And I'll leave the rest for anyone who wants to watch this 30-second story unravel. But yeah, apparently the director prefers British actors. I think there's a bigger pool than there is in Switzerland. And so I had an audition in the West End in which I had to get on my knees and sing You've Lost That Loving Feeling. So that was fun, at least.
Well, that sounds really righteous to me. Well, Deadline viewers, the answer is yes. The link to that video awesomeness is below in the show notes.
Enjoy.
Yes, I know I did. So let's connect this back to our game, shall we? Do you think that your acting ability comes in handy in playing diplomacy?
That's a tricky question. I mean, to look at my results that I've had, particularly in virtual, you'd think, no, because I've not been winning. But actually, I kind of put that more down to my ability or lack thereof to read a board and come up with a strategic direction. It doesn't matter how good your diplomacy is if you're not, what you're asking for is not what is in your best interest. So,
well, isn't that just a question of time, though? You just need more experience doing that.
I think so. I think I'm trying to improve on that. I think if that continues to be the case, then I might find that then it will more come into its own more. But of course, I'm only playing with half a tool at the moment because it's voice only, and so perhaps when I get into as I hope I do in person, face to face, then, you can look people dead in the eye, and either try and determine whether they're going to stab or not, or try and convince them that you're not going to stab, or ward something off. You can go from all affable and jokey to, I will get you.
The physicality that comes with acting is entirely useful in face-to-face. I'm here to tell you.
Well, hopefully I can use that, because, I know I'm, normally quite smiley and stuff, but you can't really see from here, but I'm quite imposing. But I'm not that tall, but I'm very broad, so maybe that can work to my advantage. Who knows?
You use whatever you use whatever you got. Well, let me give you a final question. Is there a particular game or event in your diplomacy career that stands out in your mind?
Yeah, a few do, but the first, well, I'm gonna give you two here, okay, David, because you do have star quality on the show today, so I'm gonna use that.
It's totally true.
So I think I've gone through a couple of phases in my diplomacy career so far, if we can call it that. I sort of started off as Care Bear, became a bit of a chaos agent, and then of sort of what I like to think of as the new Wardie, or the ward of calculated risks, right? And so I think there's a couple of games that sort of show or demonstrate those sort of changes at that time. The first one is at your own tournament, DixieCon, that first round board where I was playing. Do you remember this? I
was wondering if you were going to bring this one up, because I was going to if you didn't. So keep going.
So I was playing Turkey, and I was in an RT, and on the other side of the board there was an FG. They sort of dispatched England quickly and raced to the line. Meanwhile, we had an Austria 1 dot and an Italy still alive and kicking. And we got stuck here. Now, for those who don't know DixieCon and the scoring system there, it's a draw-sized scoring system. So we were looking at a 6-way draw at this point, with no one willing to back down. Now, that is not helpful to anyone.
No.
A 6-way draw. I mean, there was one 7-way draw, but they get to share, a brick between them. So I understand. So I just thought there's no way I can do this. This is ridiculous. And so I thought, with no one behind me as I'm a corner power, I thought if this game sort of comes unstuck again, I've got a decent chance. And so after vetoing, oh gosh, I don't know how many vetoes I did to this 6-way draw. But trying to pin it on the powers on the other side. So I stabbed my Eastern allies, hoping to probably get a 3-way draw with the FG on the other side. And that didn't work out very well, David, if you recall, because I went from board top to eliminated.
No, they kept that game going into like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning just to kill you.
Well, yeah, I mean, partly that was, me stretching the game, to quite late already. Part of it was me rushing back, and I blame Adam Siegel in this too. On the
that's a safe bet.
Well, yeah. I'm sorry, Adam. We've never met, but
yeah, I have met Adam Siegel. It's a safe bet.
I remember that what was going through my mind in this game was Adam said there is a 6-center stalemate line that Turkey has. And so I just thought, it doesn't matter. If I rush back to that line, then it doesn't matter how long they spend trying to get me out. They're not going to do it. Only to find that that is not the case. There is not a line that Turkey has. And so instead of delaying them even further, it would have perhaps kept me, kept me in with a good score. I sort of helped them out by retreating so drastically. But that was that transformation from Care Bear to Chaos Agent. The other game is a virtual tour of Britain game, Bannockburn, in which I got beaten to the board top by by Morgante. I was Austria. He was England. I stabbed. I think we dispatched Turkey as an air, and then I stabbed Karthik in Russia. Used him with a fleet in the south as a janissary, and stabbed Italy. But then Italy, who was Roni Mordvanov, made damn well sure I didn't top that board. But with the scoring system we used, that was a pretty good score regardless. But that was the transition into try and take the shots. Don't sit back and actually try and be a bit more proactive.
I've said it many times. That transition is the most critical one in one's diplomacy career, from someone who things happen to them to someone who decides, I'm going to make things happen. It may not turn out right, but
things have happened to me. Things have happened to me, and Nicalis, I'm watching you, so okay.
Yeah, there's apparently there's a lot of payback involved in this interview, but I appreciate that. I'm sure the viewers are going to enjoy watching this interview, Wardie. And thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
And now for this episode's panel discussion. The goal of our game is 18 supply centers, what we call the solo, but it's devilishly hard to achieve, and we all know that. One way it can happen, though, is when one or more players decide not to contest another power's solo push or even to actively assist that push. Throwing a solo. It's a phenomenon as old as the hobby itself, but is it acceptable? If so, what are the circumstances under which throwing might be considered a legitimate move or even a good move? Let's find out by talking to this month's panel of guests. Here's Johnny Gillum, currently located in Morocco, and then the Anderson twins, Tommy the Tornado in Massachusetts, and John the Jackal from the great state of Utah. All right, John the Jackal, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the game.
Yeah, thanks, David. I don't know what's worse, being called a Jekyll or a felt 80s presidential candidate, but I'm John Anderson, and I live in the Rocky Mountains. I work for Big Brown, basically enabling hoarders and online shopaholics to get their fix. I'm married. I got 3 boys. I'm trying to get them into diplomacy, but we're starting them off with Stratego and 4-player chess. And I'm passionate about this topic. Happy to be here.
Great. All right, Gillum, I'm going to ask you now about your diplomacy origin story and where you are.
Howdy. Can you hear me?
I can.
I'm coming to you from sunny Rabat, Morocco here. And I got started playing diplomacy working at the history department of the University of Washington. We used to play house games every once in a while.
And
I too, I'm happy to be here.
I see a palm tree in your background. I know you said you were in Rabat. Tell me what you're doing there.
I'm an English teacher. I've been here since last August, approximately.
You know, it's funny. Nobody would ever ask me to teach anybody else English. I don't know why. I don't know why that might be true.
Why could that be, David? I don't know. I don't get it.
I have no idea. No idea. All right, Tornado. What zany winds blew you into our hobby?
I forget. It was an article. I don't know if it was Grantland or Vice or something like that. It was like the board game of Alpha Nerds, and that kind of just was like, oh, this sounds interesting. I'd always played board games before, and I was like, oh, this seems interesting. Then I matched with Tanya on Tinder, and she got me into the hobby. So I was all right. We'll go from there.
Well, that's great. That's a great news. So let me stay with you, Tommy. We want to establish first our various experiences with throwing. I'm sure many of our viewers at DBN watched you win Cascadia last month on the wings of a thrown solo. Yeah. So how do you feel about that? And how much of that have you seen in your career?
Well, I felt really dirty about it. Like that's not how I wanted to win, but I actually the thing is I've seen it a lot on like Gumbo on Backstabber or whatnot. I haven't really seen it that many times. Well, I also haven't been playing that long for like face to face, and yeah, I think I've only ever seen like two games or so like actually in person face to face, and it felt very different being on the receiving end than none actually like getting thrown to. It's almost like kind of watching like a slow moving car or train wreck. Like you can see, like it's like you can see it yourself, but the other people are like, "Oh no, that person's never going to stab me. It's going to be perfectly fine." And then they don't see what's coming, and sure enough, it happens.
How about you, John? Have you seen this happen very much in your diplomacy career?
No, I don't think I've been thinking about. So I started playing when I was like a teenager, face to face, just with my cousins and brothers and stuff. And we never had a solo like in all those years. And I'm 33 now. And we play every year, and we never have thrown a solo, and we never obtained a solo. So, but we always had a philosophy of maintaining a balance and never letting anybody try to get an edge or anything. But and then playing, face to face and on Backstabber, Conspiracy, and other places and stuff. I just don't experience very often. I think when there's a solo, I'm usually long dead and gone. So, and I've never, I don't think, given my thoughts away all the way. But I think it's important to distinguish, what exactly is throwing a solo. I think there's lots of different categories. Like if you're just on the line, you're a 1-2, dot power, and somebody's trying to kill you and get, a better position and stop a solo on your behalf, then by all means, fight for your life. Or if you're like turkey stuck in the corner and some other powers are trying to dig you out at the same time, also pretending or trying to stop a solo, yeah, for sure, fight for your life. I don't consider that a throw, but definitely I think if you're in a position of power, like you're one of the top 3 players on the board, and then all of a sudden you decide to vacate that position or give it up, and I think for sure that is considered throwing a solo. But I think you got to look at it 2 different ways. The first way is, a win is a win. You win a tournament, you win a game, for sure, you're the winner, 100%. You achieve that. But then on the second hand, there's kind of like a social cost that they're maybe in future games or interactions in the future, people might have opinions one way or another and treat you like that. But I got to back Tommy up. I went back and I looked at that game, and I think that's totally legit what happened. Tommy put himself in a position, maybe found somebody who was willing to do something like that. Maybe other people on the board, through their diplomacy and their connections, facilitated what was going to happen. And Tommy was in the right place in the right time and put himself in a position to win that game. So that's totally a win, thrown solo or not. It's a solo.
Well, Johnny Gillum, let's go back over to you. What stands out to you about thrown solo games, whether it's this one we were talking about with Tommy or some other games you've seen?
Yeah, I actually really agree with John's comment there. I think there are fundamentally 2 different kinds of thrown solos. One of them, which I'm really in favor of, which is when you're doing what you call playing the small time, David. You've only got a couple centers, but they're strategically placed, and the leverage you have there is to make threats to throw, right? Like everybody's got to listen to me because I get to decide whether all of you get points or none of you get points, and that's great, right? And you make that kind of a threat, and then you get stabbed. Yeah, make your threats credible, throw that solo. You got stabbed. I think it's different when somebody after a certain amount of time just decides to stop playing. It's just yeah, I'm not interested in this game anymore. Might as well let somebody else win. I don't really care. And that's not something that would really be accepted in a different context either, right? If you sit down to play a game of chess and somebody starts just suiciding their pieces, it's this is stupid. What are we doing here? So I would distinguish. Those both get called throwing, but I would distinguish between those 2 plays. I would be interested to hear from Tommy which of those he feels happened in his game. But yeah, there's no shade on Tommy. You take the win when it's offered. So.
Well, we'll come back to Tommy about that in a minute. But you've broken down the 2 different possible scenarios. Are there scenarios even different from the ones you just talked about, where throwing would be a legitimate move to punish somebody for a bad play, to get after somebody who stabbed you. Tell me what you think about that, whether those potential revenge moves are legitimate.
Maybe. It depends, right? Like, I'll throw left, right, and center in speedboat. Like, I don't care. If you piss me off even a little bit in speed, I'll throw against you. Because it's speedboat. Who cares, right? And you can't talk, so there's, like, implicit threats. In face-to-face, like, if somebody makes you mad, you just wreck everyone else's game to punish them. Like, I mean, sure, it's legitimate because, like, it's a hobby and people can do what they want. But I think that probably deserves to be frowned upon. And someone who makes a kind of move like that probably deserves to be punished in future games, unless what happened to them was, like, truly odious, right? And, that can happen, right? And in those cases, I guess I suppose I'd call it case by case.
That sounds a little subjective to me, just saying.
Yeah, maybe.
Tommy, let's go over to you. What do you think that throwing solos is seen in the hobby as good, bad, or somewhere in the middle?
I'm not a fan, despite the fact that I just won that way. But it's not something that I would. Well, I know people give me kind of grief too with saying that I let Karthik win Dixie, but that wasn't quite a solo. I think he was at 17 or whatnot. But it's. I'm definitely in the position where I'm going to always at least try to, even if it's something that I worked with the entire game, I'm going to at least try to prevent them from getting to that last dot. Unless they've been really nice to me. I don't know. It depends on the wins, I guess.
Well, you would say something windy like that, wouldn't you? John Anderson, I feel like I have seen you throw, and I have seen you complain about people throwing, and I want to know exactly where you stand on this issue.
Well, David, that sounds like a little bit of a loaded question, and maybe there's some history behind it. And I just want to say that, hey, even Deadline News broadcasters can throw a solo.
Here we go.
And no matter how much Southern charm you lay on it, I'm not going to believe it otherwise. So, I think we're all capable of doing it. And I'm a huge hypocrite on the issue. I don't think I've ever thrown a solo in a face-to-face game, but definitely in a gunboat game. And I did have an egregious one with just recently. We finished our SBD tournament where Brandon Fogel hosts it, and I got in a big spat with a little rookie upstart named Riaz. I don't expect you guys have heard of him, and we kind of bashed heads for 15 seasons over one center, and boy, I was just like, you know what? I think I got enough that I could still win this and throw this and teach this guy a lesson, and. Brandon, he texted all of us, and he's like, "Are you guys gonna finish this game or what?" And I said, "You know what? Generally, I really fight for never throwing a solo, and I really don't like it when other people do it. But I'm really thinking about doing it today. I'm like, there's always time to be a hypocrite, right?" And he gave me some great advice. He said it's never too late to be a hypocrite. And so I threw that solo to teach Riaz a lesson, and it ended up backfiring on me big time. And I remember after the game being like, hey, if I needed those 40 points, I never would have thrown the solo. And then I lost the title by 40 points, by 39 points. So, hey, joke's on me.
Oh, man.
My own pride and hubris was my downfall. And guess what? It's almost funner to me in a way because it's kind of like a funny little lesson. But if I would give some advice to people, if I do have any, it's, temper your passions, always play for position. Take what's given to you. Don't try to teach anybody a lesson or prove a point. They'll end up just blowing in your face. And I think some people do have a reputation of never throwing a solo, and that has backfired on me as well. I remember being in a tournament game, 2 years ago or something with Russ Dennis, and he stabbed me, and he told me, he's like, "I stabbed you because I know you're not going to throw a solo." And so I think that can kind of hurt you if you have a reputation of never throwing. And then likewise, there's some people that's kind of like their modus operandi, hey, if you do anything to me, I'm going to totally wreck this game and throw it out of line. And so you got to treat those people with the utmost respect and kid gloves, So hopefully, if they're your ally, they throw for you, and if they're not your ally, then good luck on that board. So.
I wanted to follow up on something you said about gunboat and this, and I think actually Johnny said this too about speedboat. Do you think this issue is different in a gunboat or speedboat game than it is from a regular game?
Yeah, I think so. I think you could argue either way, but I think I kind of lean more towards. I think it's harder to kind of control the passions of it all in a face-to-face game or virtual face-to-face, just because you have such a limited time. You only got like 15 minutes, in most cases, and so if a big event happens on the board, somebody gets lied to, stabbed, or whatever, you don't really maybe have enough time to calm that person down and for that person to get their emotions under control and make rational decisions. So I think, I think that could be, you could maybe lay off people when that kind of happens. So you understand passions are high in diplomacy games, but I think for gunboat, generally the turns are a day apart. And so if you feel like somebody's kind of picking on you, trying to drill you out of a, if they're trying to get you out of, stalemating the board or whatever, or trying to cut you out of a draw, or somebody is tempting us with a solo, I feel like you have some space and time to kind of let your emotions get under control. And, maybe a couple seasons in, turn around and fight back and do whatever, but then have the wherewithal to actually say, hey, no, I think this person through their moves is trying to demonstrate to me that, hey, they're trying to make amends, we're trying to stop the solo, and then to have the wherewithal to counter that and to jump on board the train. But obviously I'm a hypocrite in that regard because I had a very egregious throw with Ruiz. So take what I say with a grain of salt. That's what I'm saying.
Well, to be honest, John, I take most things you say with a grain of salt, and so does our viewer. So does our viewership.
Well, that's good. That's good
so
advice.
I feel like that's really an important reason to put you on this panel. But no, seriously, it does seem very different to me in the gunboat environment versus the regular environment. Johnny, let me go over to you now that you no longer look like a villain on the 1960s Batman show that's sideways. Now that you look straightways, let me ask you if you think that the issue of scoring systems changes this equation at all in terms of thrown solos.
Sorry about the move, and I'm going to have to actually switch over. This has totally killed my phone battery. I think it does and it doesn't. I mean, I'm not aware of any scoring system that doesn't weight a solo at completely astronomically higher score than any high board top. Aside from crazy ones on WebDip where it was sometimes in a given player's interest to they'd get a higher score in a solo situation than if they just took the draw, which is madness and silliness. But aside from these situations, I think a solo is always just a solo is a solo in any scoring system, and I think it's always weighted highly enough that throwing is going to be an extremely legitimate option and a big impact.
Okay. Tommy, let me go to you. It seems to me like there are some players whose style or their temperament is conducive to throwing and some that simply not. Right. Do you find that to be true?
I've definitely seen that a bit. Because some people they can be very reactionary, and not even necessarily soloing or throwing a solo, but just in terms of you do one little thing that they don't expect and they just completely go off the edge, and that's kind of difficult to navigate, and you have to kind of figure out how you can work with them. And sometimes that could be good for you in your favor if you can figure out how to leverage that, get some other player to just do something to just barely slight them and they'll just go crazy in your favor. That wasn't necessarily the case and sometimes it just comes out of the blue. For example, the game I just played at Cascadia with Christoph, I really honestly didn't understand why he was doing what he was doing. I obviously appreciated it, but it's not something that I would have pushed him into or expected. So sometimes just that entropy and things just happen in ways you don't expect. So it's always kind of interesting to see. But there's definitely I feel like there are some people who, like I say, not necessarily throwing a solo, just are very reactionary and just go off the deep end. It's hard to kind of figure out why that is the case.
Tommy, I think I speak for the entire hobby when I say that if we had got through this interview without you using the word entropy, I would have been. I think we all would have been disappointed. So I'm going to give it now the mic back to you for your final thoughts on this topic, Tommy, about throne solos.
I don't like them, but I'll take it if you give it to me, which is nice. But I think it's good to just honestly one of the I've only ever seen one solo that I thought was truly deserved. Was the Boston Massacre Tanya. I think it was 2020, 2021, a year or two ago, where it's almost like you're seeing it moving in slow motion. You're just like, well done, like you played them perfectly. And I kept trying to pull aside. I think she was Turkey. I can't remember for sure. And there was Italy and Russia, I think, working with her. And I'm just seeing it coming, and I'm trying to pull them aside. Like, guys, like you do just tactically, like you do see what's going to happen here. You were completely opening yourself to her to just literally walk in. And they're like, no, we've worked so well with her the entire game. It's not going to happen. Like we've already talked, we've agreed, negotiated at a certain dot count where we'll all be happy. And I'm like, no, that's not going to happen. And sure enough, I think she took like 5 dots, like right at the end. I'm just like, yep, well done. GG.
Yeah, I think we all remember that one. Those of us that were in the hobby at that time, anyway. All right, John the Jackal, what about final thoughts from you?
I just think on this topic, like it's tough. I think we've all been in those situations where you've been on the other side of the line and somebody's, ally has been stabbed, and then they just kind of turn around and give up and throw their centers, and it can be really frustrating, right? Especially in like tournament plays, you've devoted a lot of your time over a weekend. You just spent 15 hours playing diplomacy. You've had some really good tops, and then all of a sudden there's, a thrown solo somewhere. And I'm not exactly sure how to remedy the situation. I think it's something in the hobby that we're always going to have to deal with because we're dealing with personalities and not robots. Until Marcus Zylstra, perfects that AI project he's working on, and we all get replaced. I think the human element is always going to play a role in, either emotions or even sometimes logical, solo throwing as well happens to, establish that seems to be kind of a valid strategy for some folks. I'm not exactly sure. The data might be out on that if that actually, pays off for them in the long run. But I just think in this topic, it's just hard to do. Like, what do you do? How do you remedy that situation? Because maybe tournament or maybe league play is the way to go because you are playing, 5, 6, 7 or more games. And so if there's a thrown solo, you can still catch up and make it. Maybe in tournament play, you have a top board. So if there's a thrown solo, you still have to compete against 6 other people who had a good score. But we even know top boards have their own issues as well. So I think in final thoughts, I would just say, it's something we got to live with, right? Just like in life, we can't control other people. We can only react when things are happening to us. And so hopefully it all balances itself out through a league or over a tournament. But, passionate people about throwing solos are here to stay. And we should appreciate that diversity in the hobby, right? It's the spice of life. It's the spice of the hobby.
I like that answer. All right. Johnny, I'm going to come back to you. You are the only one of us that's currently sitting in a space on the diplomacy board, i.e. the province of North Africa. So I feel like you need to get the final word on this subject, so go.
Sure. The final word on the subject of North Africa is never convoy there. It's the only unsexy convoy on the board of diplomacy. But when it comes to throwing solos, I think play your hardest. I think there are times when playing your hardest, especially as a smaller power, means threatening to throw a solo and then good on that threat if that's what it comes to, and that's fine. I think if you're not in that situation, then throwing a solo isn't playing your hardest, and that's just not being a competitor in good faith. And yeah, play our hardest always, or don't come to the board, right? But we're here to play our hardest, and we want to have a good game, and it can be crappy when somebody just kind of gives up. Yeah, that's my final thoughts on the subject.
All right, so what I'm getting is play your hardest or don't come to the board. We
That's right.
appreciate the variety, which is the spice of life, and diversity in the hobby, and entropy. Those are the themes from this discussion. Guys, thanks for being on Deadline.
Thank you, David Hood.
Thank you, David.
And thanks to all of you watching at home. We hope you have enjoyed this broadcast of Deadline. If you have news, ideas for features, or feedback of any kind, please feel free to send an email to info@diplobn.com, or you can drop me a line directly using davidhood@dixiecon.com. For our other broadcast offerings, visit our website at diplobn.com. This is David Hood signing off. I wish you brightness and bliss and, of course, Belgium.